Welcome to the channel. Today, we're exploring some unbelievable story. Stay tuned and let's dive in. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, the nurse has phoned and the doctor will see you immediately. Please come this way. We followed her into Dr. Thomas Green's office, with me appreciating the swing of her slender hips and Laura pinching me in the ribs when she saw my look. Dr. Green, a longtime friend and neighbor, asked Michael and Chloe to have a seat. Look, I have good news and bad news. The results of your test have come back. Laura, it appears that you have an especially virulent and uncommon case of vaginitis. That's the bad news. The good news is that it's certainly treatable, but in your case, treatment will take a few months. Michael, the bad news for you is that that part of Laura's anatomy is off limits for you for at least 4 to 6 months. We both heaved a sigh of relief that the situation was not more severe. While I was upset, I recognized it wasn't that deep. It's not like we had an exciting sex life. In truth, it was rather boring and intermittent. I glanced across at Laura and was astonished to see a faint grin appear on her lips before swiftly disappearing. Thank goodness that's all it is, I said. Laura interjected, explain the treatment, Dr. Green. I hope that it doesn't involve going to the hospital. No, Laura, Dr. Green said. I will give you a prescription for vaginal suppositories. You are to insert one every morning after your shower and at night before bedtime. This is the treatment recommended and it's more than 99% effective. You'll be fine, said the doctor. So, with our prescription in hand, we left Dr. Green's office and proceeded home. I asked Chloe if she wanted me to fill her prescription, but she shook her head and said she'd take care of it. We traveled in comfortable stillness and I reflected on the fact that I would not have intercourse with Laura for about a year. Funny thing is, although I was angry, I didn't feel very disappointed. I was shocked to find myself just slightly upset. I looked across at Laura and felt pleased of how she had kept herself so slender and fit. We joined to our community's fitness facility and Olivia had made full use of its amenities to keep in shape. Damn, she looked fantastic at 41. I really felt she weighed no more today than when we initially married. Her early morning start at 6 a.m. jogging undoubtedly helped her maintain a healthy weight. So, why did her sex life seem so boring? I realize I'm nearing 50, but that doesn't mean I should remain practically celibate. I had no trouble getting it up, so to speak. So, why wasn't having sex with Laura more exciting? I knew I still looked very decent. I was a little heavier, but the additional 10 pounds were evenly spread over my 6 feet 1 inch body. My black hair was still thick, with a few silver strands visible at my temples, which I felt made me seem dignified. We had a lot of fun, and I believe Laura felt the same way. We had a lot of fun doing it, and we had a lot of fun doing it. We had sex at least a couple of times a week instead of 4 or 5 times a week, but it wasn't just the quantity of sex, it was also the quality. We've been married for nearly 18 years now, and they've been, in my opinion, very good ones. We met through a mutual friend my first year out of law school, and I almost swallowed my tongue the first time I saw her. She was about 5 feet 6 inches tall, had a beautiful figure, short light brown hair, and flashing green eyes. The whole package almost had me hooked. We struck it off right away, dated for a year before marrying. The children arrived swiftly. Laura wanted children as soon as possible. Ethan was born a year after we married, and Grace 15 months later. Laura took the required maternity leave and returned to work as soon as we felt safe leaving the kids at daycare. Ethan is now married and Grace is a senior in college. But things had shifted gradually over the last 6 months. Our connection was now virtually mechanical. Laura refused to initiate sex, and when I did, she complied reluctantly. That type of reaction may kill one's desire, as it did mine. I suppose it was simply simpler not to approach her. I just did not like making love to a lady who may as well be asleep. I sighed and thought to myself, I suppose it won't be too difficult for me to stop having intercourse with Laura. In any case, it hasn't been that enjoyable. The next week was quite hectic for me. I am an attorney and partner at a business in Riverside, and we were rushing to finalize a proposal for a potential client. Landing this one would bring in a significant cash for the company, therefore I was leaving the house early and returning late. Thank heavens I had Grace Matthews, another partner at the company, working with me. She was intelligent and insightful, and I knew her involvement would contribute significantly to the project's success. Laura understood. She had been through similar situations previously and knew how they operated. We'd be frantic for a few weeks, then everything would calm down and we could resume our usual lives. Laura was keeping herself occupied. She would depart for work shortly after I did. She had worked for the same medical supply firm since graduating from college and was now a senior sales representative. Her income still astounded me. It was well into the 6 digits. You may probably tell that we lived pretty well. A few weeks later, on a Saturday, I got a splinter in my finger while working in the garage and couldn't get it out. Laura wasn't home yet, so I walked upstairs to her wardrobe and sought for a needle from her sewing kit to pull the splinter out. I then noticed a luxe lingerie shopping bag stuck beneath a piece of baggage. My curiosity got the best of me, so I pulled the bag out and glanced inside. I removed and opened the package. Wow, a stunning negligee, translucent and extremely short, with a very tiny pair of sheer thong panties to match. Geez, I thought my sex life was going to perk up. I didn't want to ruin Laura's surprise, so I carefully repacked everything and returned it to its original location. Now all I had to do was wait till Laura finished her treatments. When it was completed, we would celebrate in style. I hummed as I returned to the garage, completely forgetting about the splinter. A few weeks later, as we were watching the late news one evening, I turned to her and said, "Laura, if you are in the city tomorrow, could you stop by the Heritage Bakery and get some cheesecake? I love it." Laura would travel to Evergreen every Friday to visit a handful of her customers. She thought a few months ago that it would be simpler to stay overnight and drive back on Saturday morning. That was preferable than battling the traffic Friday evening. I was surprised to see an expression of irritation cross her face. "I'll try, Michael, but you know how busy I am when I'm in the city, so don't get your hopes up," she said harshly. She then returned her attention to the television. What the heck was it about? I wondered. I didn't bring it up again, but I noted that she returned on Saturday without my cheesecake and with no mention of it. I was upset, but I chose not to raise the matter. I was conscious that our connection during the last 6 months had not been particularly affectionate. We used to become upset with each other at the smallest provocation. I wondered where the love and care had gone. I began to worry about our marriage. Was this what my future will be like? Indifference, dullness, and a lack of true closeness. And I don't mean just sexual. For the first time, I started to see a dark future. I waited for an appropriate opportunity when we were both comfortable and sitting by the pool one Sunday. "Laura, I really need to have a serious conversation with you," I told her. She glanced up at me with the same annoyed expression. This time, I just disregarded it and moved ahead. "You have to realize that there's obviously something wrong with our marriage. We don't seem to care as much for each other as we once did. We argue about silly things much more than is good for this relationship. Instead of conversations, we walk around almost ignoring each other." I waited slightly before asking, "Laura, are you having an affair? Do you still love me?" I saw her tighten and her gaze sharpen momentarily. She stood and approached me, taking a seat close to my side. "Oh, Michael, don't be silly. You know that I love you," she whispered tenderly, reaching out to caress my face. "And you're right, of course, we are drifting apart. We have to remember why we are together. I have to remember. I'm sorry, Michael. I know that I have been difficult to live with lately. I don't know why that is, but things will be different now. I believe I needed to hear how you felt." "Thanks, honey," she said softly as she bent over to kiss me gently. I felt comforted. I realized that all marriages go through this stage when partners take each other for granted. Fortunately, we recognized this and will take efforts to overcome it. So why was I nervous, and why didn't Laura meet my gaze while she reaffirmed her love for me? Things improved significantly during the following several months. Laura was far more solicitous and took the time to do the little things that are so important in a partnership. I was glad I had that chat with her. In fact, the following Saturday she brought home a cheesecake for me. I was delighted with both her kindness and the cheesecake. Then, very gradually, Laura disappeared again. Slowly, apathy and chill returned. I must underline that there was never an overt act of cruelty, no wrath, viciousness, or spitefulness. That would have taken some passion. As far as I could tell, it was the crux of the issue. Our marriage had lost all of its passion. I was at a loss. I wasn't sure what to do or what measures to take next. I wasn't going to have the same discussion again. I decided to take a deep breath, stand back, and attempt to figure out why Laura was withdrawing. Could it be that she was just complacent after almost 18 years of marriage, or was it something more serious? In this state of mind, I became more attentive. Yes, it was at the back of my mind, weighing on me, and I tried to keep it there. However, the first inklings of suspicion about Laura's loyalty emerged. I was quite confident I was being silly, yet the ambiguity lingered. There's no point pretending. But this was a reach, I reminded myself. But was it? She had plenty of opportunities to wander. I shook my head, conceding that I could be growing paranoid, simply to comfort myself. The next Friday, I returned to Laura's wardrobe in quest of the negligee. It was not there. It was gone. I felt my pulse rate rise, so I sat down and tried to relax. I then opened her drawers and located her underwear drawer. I discovered it was full of underwear. Amazing. I began to feel foolish, almost like a character in a romance novel, the naive, unprepared spouse. I then headed to a walk-in closet. I remained frozen for a while, astonished by the wide selection of apparel. I next looked at a wall of shoes and boots, neatly packed on shelves in boxes. On a whim, I plucked a boot box from the bottom of a shelf. It was huge, and she had half a dozen of them. I located the tag. It was no longer tagged, nor were the thong panties they were wearing. There was an assortment of seductive and provocative underwear, along with 2 additional boxes. So numerous that she could have started her own elegant secrets. This everything was packed into 3 huge boxes. I instantly sat back and tried to regain my breath. I was having trouble breathing, like if all of the oxygen had been pulled from the globe. At the bottom of the last box, I found a little circular container filled with small purple tablets, enough for a month's supply. I knew what they were. She had been using birth control pills for almost 10 years prior to my vasectomy. A month's supply with none missing. Was this a stockpile for when she used up what she had concealed elsewhere? It seems that all of my inquiries had been addressed and all of my misgivings were validated. I had finally gotten the answers I needed. My uncertainty was resolved. So why did I feel like I was blinking away the tears that had begun to form in my eyes? I battled against the nausea and took long, deep breaths. I quickly but carefully returned everything to where I had found it and went out of the bedroom and down the stairs. I began towards the bar but halted. I needed to clear my brain. I strolled out to the terrace, sat down, and started to contemplate. I attempted to steel myself. I attempted to organize my thoughts and make choices about my immediate intentions. I could not. I simply couldn't think clearly. I felt my insides churning. I felt myself sweating, blushing, and then becoming chilly and shivering. I was overcome with loneliness and grief. It seemed like my life was over. I loved this lady with every fiber of my being, and she had purposefully and brutally betrayed that love. I began to experience another emotion: fury. No, not anger. Rage. I trembled with it. I saw that I had tightened my hands and dug my nails into my palms. So I stayed there for what seemed like hours but was really only about 30 minutes, alternating between grief and wrath. I considered divorce and was confident that it was going to happen. I'm not a divorce lawyer, but I was aware that this state permitted both fault and no-fault divorces. I also understood that infidelity was a valid reason for a fault divorce. Her ability to distribute our assets would be jeopardized. I also realized I didn't give a crap. We both had money to spare. I didn't want to go through the inconvenience, but I knew I needed concrete proof, which I didn't currently have. My brain had begun to function again. I started making plans, tentative, but at least I was thinking. A notion struck me, and I returned to the stairs. I entered the bathroom and examined Laura's belongings around the sink area. I have no idea what half of that trash was. I began to carefully search through the little bags and plastic boxes at the bottom of a huge cosmetics bag. I discovered what I was searching for: a little circular bottle of birth control tablets. It seems that she would take her regular tablet while in the restroom. Clever. There were 5 tablets remaining. It seems that she will soon be utilizing her concealed hoard. I wasn't sure whether this would work, but it would make for an intriguing experiment. I swiftly walked to her closet, picked out the right box, reached inside, and withdrew the whole bottle of pills. I dashed downstairs, dumped them all onto a glass dish, and set them in the microwave oven. I nuked the suckers for 60 seconds. I then pulled the tablets out to inspect them. I sighed with relief since I didn't notice any difference. I gently returned each drug to its bottle and placed it back in the boot box. I had no clue whether I had damaged the tablet's usefulness, but the following 3 weeks would be quite fascinating. I had another notion and dashed up the stairs, grabbed our last 5 tablets, and nuked them all. I got a random thought: maybe I might apply for a research grant from Planned Parenthood. Laura didn't pay any attention to me, so the weekend was unremarkable. I was able to respond properly. On Saturday and Sunday, I tried to avoid her as much as possible, but she paid no attention, a very decent indicator of the status of our marriage. On Monday morning, I walked into the workplace feeling relieved. I was sitting at my desk, looking out the window, when Grace stepped in. "Okay, Michael, what's the problem? I know you well enough to know when something's gnawing at you." "Talk to me, pal," she said me. I stared at her with affection. What a wonderful woman. She had worked with the business for nearly 8 years, and I praised our fortunate stars that we had the foresight to recruit her. She had now become a partner as a result of her hard work and intellect. Of course, I was the first to acknowledge that her attractive appearance and fit figure did not harm. She was in her mid-40s and just divorced before beginning employment here. I paused for a bit, wondering if I should tell her. Grace had become quite close to Laura over the years. They'd become really close friends. They even managed to meet up every couple of weeks for lunch or shopping. Regardless, or maybe because of that, I went forward. Perhaps, in this situation, 2 heads are better than 1. Laura's having an affair, and I think that it's been going on for a while now. Grace's jaw fell open. She looked strange sitting there like that. Her jaw jerked shut, and she said, "Okay, Michael, why do you think that?" The lawyer in her had taken over, so I told her all I knew about how the relationship had gradually deteriorated, my findings on Friday, but not what I had done to the tiny purple tablets. I'm not sure why I didn't tell her, but I kept it a secret for the time being. Grace sat attentively for a time. "What are you going to do, Michael? I would urge you to give yourself some time before taking any drastic action. Get yourself together. This is still very fresh, so make sure that you act sensibly." With a confused expression on her face, she inquired, "Tell me again about her medical condition." Her phone rang, and she murmured, "Oh, my client is here. I have to go. But Michael, keep me informed. Let me help however I can. I'll stop by later." I nodded and thanked her as she raced away. I knew what my next action would be, so I picked out my phone and dialed a number. "Good morning, Graysons," a female voice said. "Hi, Marge, it's Michael Turner." "Oh, hello, Mr. Olson. I will call him for you," she said. Henry Foster joined the call in a matter of seconds. "Hi, Michael, how are you?" "Not wonderful, Paul. I need your services, and sooner rather than later. Can you come over now?" He detected the stress in my voice. "I'll see you in around 30 minutes, Michael." Henry Foster was seated in a chair in my office, as promised. I felt better simply having him around. He ran a private investigative firm that the office employed regularly. Paul was efficient, discreet, and very ethical, or as ethical as one can be given his occupation. I told Paul all of the facts and my suspicions, but I didn't reveal what I'd done with the birth control pills. I questioned why I wasn't sharing this, but I reasoned that it had no influence on what I was about to do anyhow. Paul sat quietly, sometimes interrupting to ask a few questions. When I finished, he just shook his head. "Damn, Michael. I'm really sorry. I don't know what else to say, but that's neither here nor there. I'm assuming that you want definitive evidence of any infidelity, right?" I just nodded, unable to respond. This was now entering a new phase, a fairly dirty and ugly one. Based on what you've told me, the weekends from Saturday afternoon until Monday morning are not in question, he said. So we have to monitor your wife's activities from Monday until she leaves for Boston on Friday morning. Let's see if there's anything out of the ordinary during those days. You realize, of course, that it's her time in Boston that we have to examine very carefully. What hotel does she use? I handed him the information, and he seemed satisfied. Very good, Michael. I know the head of security there, and I'm sure that we will be able to cover everything that happens during the time that she's there. I'll be getting back to you as soon as I have anything. He stood and turned to go. Then he paused and looked at me with pity in his eyes. Look, Michael, just hang in there. Don't do anything out of the ordinary. Can you do that? I again nodded. He shook his head and left my office. I sat there, somewhat shaken. This creature was taking on a life of its own. I had lost some control and felt adrift. I attempted to evaluate my emotions for Laura. I discovered that I both loved and despised her. I despised what she was doing, including her treachery and cheating. I pondered whether I could forgive her. Can you forgive her for messing up someone else? Forgive her for breaking our marital vows. Forgive her for the humiliation I experienced. Forgive her for the falsehoods and disrespect she had exhibited toward our marriage. I grinned grimly. I'd missed the cheesecake. The week was stressful at work and at home. It seemed that I couldn't focus on the tasks that required my attention at work. At home, it took all I had to keep things normal. Actually, it wasn't that tough. Laura seemed busy, as she always does. I don't think she would have noticed if I had a heart attack and died in bed. Paul phoned me into the office on Friday morning. Michael, I have nothing for you at the present. Laura's activities have been entirely normal. Nothing out of the ordinary. We are now going to concentrate on what she does in the city. I have spoken to my contact in the hotel and everything is covered. I'll get back to you Monday morning. I have your cell phone number and I'll call you on Saturday with a preliminary report. Is that okay? I said that would be okay. I swallowed after dropping the phone on its base. This was coming to a head now and I was terrified, frightened for the future. I understood I'd have to make the choices I'd been putting off. I recognized that I needed to start thinking about my future, but first I wanted to hear from Paul. I was in the garage Saturday afternoon, putting away a garden shovel, when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced out and saw Laura in the kitchen. I responded. It's Paul. Hi, Michael, it's not good news. Let me give you some information. You'll get a DVD and 2 copies and our complete report, plus 2 copies, Monday morning in your office. Is that okay? I whispered an assent and saw my hand quivering slightly. He paused and continued. Laura checked into the hotel around 11 a.m. Friday morning. A bellman took her bag up to her suite. She visited 2 large medical practices and then had lunch around 12. After lunch, she spent about an hour and a half at a dental supply house. She returned to the hotel around 3, went up to her room, undressed, and showered. She did not dress after her shower, she just threw on a lightweight robe. She called down for a bot. A man arrived at 4 p.m. Paul cleared his throat. The guy's name is David Clark. He's an MD and lives not far from you. I assume you know him. Okay, Paul, make sure to send over everything you have on Monday. I'll take it from there. And Paul, thanks. I appreciate your help, and I was able to go. We said farewell, and I turned off the phone. I wasn't surprised. I had already determined who she was associated with. The little purple tablets were my first hint. I knew she required a prescription for those, and Roger was her doctor. The conversation regarding her vaginitis sealed the deal. Julia had told me about it, and I checked the internet. Getting over that condition seldom took more than a week, and never 6 months, so it wasn't hard to figure out that I wasn't going to get 5. They must have had a good chuckle at cutting me off, the poor schmuck of a husband, not receiving any love from his devoted wife while she's banging another guy's brains out. A light bulb went on in my brain. I realized why I hadn't told Laura what I had done to her birth control pills. I felt embarrassed of myself. After all, it was a terribly bad thing to do. But guess what? I felt no longer humiliated. The embarrassment was gone. Anger had taken hold and was holding my sadness and anguish at bay. But the wrath I felt now was not the same as the rage that had overtaken me before. This was a cold, planned, and nasty outrage. I wanted to lash out at both of them. I wanted them to be as hurt as I am right now. Laura had shown to be a betrayer, and her boyfriend was no exception. He had a wife and a career. He took a significant risk for an illegal piece of meat. I am not a cunning person by nature, and I had no such ideas. Whatever action I take will be plain and direct. I had no reason to be deceitful. My strategy was simple, yet it would be as damaging as the most sinister conspiracy. Now the challenge was to appear as if I had no suspicions. I just had to be my regular polite and unassuming idiot of a spouse. I believe I could have received an Oscar for my self-control that weekend. I left the home early Monday. I was gone before Laura got out of bed. I couldn't bring myself to confront her again. I arrived at the workplace early, poured myself some coffee, and sat at my desk, waiting. People started to come in, but because my door was locked, I wasn't worried. I informed my secretary, Pam, that I would only take calls from Henry Foster and that I was expecting a box, which she should immediately bring into me when it came. 10 minutes later, my office door opened and Grace went in and sat down on a chair. "Michael, you know that Laura and I have become close friends. I fear for your future together. Talk to me, Michael. Tell me what's going on, please," she said him. "Grace, for your own sake, I'm not going to tell you anything. Things will be coming to a head very soon. You'll then know the whole story. Until then, I have to ask that you not get involved in this mess, for your own good, as well as for mine. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I responded with a straight face. Grace nodded, and I saw tears in her eyes. She stood and turned to face me. "You know that I'll do whatever I can for both of you. But also know that I won't abandon Laura," gently she said. "A good friend, Grace." "I know that you'll do whatever you think is best," I said quietly. Pam entered my office a few minutes after Grace had left, carrying a box. I informed her I didn't want any disruptions for the next several hours, no phones, no guests. I have to confess that I had a lump in my throat when I opened the present. Inside the basic, circular box were Paul's 3 reports and 3 DVDs. I opened up my laptop and inserted the CD. It opened with a view of a normal hotel room, complete with a king-sized bed in the center. I could see more of the bathroom and noted the enormous mirror over the dresser. I then observed a bellman enter the room with a piece of baggage that I recognized as my wife's. He put it on the floor, and I glimpsed his back as he turned to go. There was no view of the entrance or arch leading into the chamber. The timestamp indicated that it was 10:20 a.m. The picture flickered, and I saw Laura enter the room. The time was 3 p.m. I saw her shake her jacket off her shoulders and lay it over a chair. She glanced in the mirror and straightened her brow. She then unbuttoned her blouse and hurled it in the direction of the chair. My brows furrowed as I spotted the bra she was wearing. It's no surprise that she wore a work suit with a jacket. I questioned why she hadn't waited for her partner to come before disrobing. She entered the restroom, and there was the sound of her tinkling. She then cleaned herself briefly, stood, and went out of sight. I then heard the shower go on. It wasn't long until I saw Laura return to her bedroom, drying herself with a huge bath towel. I had to acknowledge that, even after all these years, she had maintained her figure firm and fit. I instantly realized that, for the first time since I slept her nakedness did not excite me. I did not have a hard-on. All I felt was resentment and rage. She put on a lightweight short robe, poured herself a glass of wine, and turned on the television. I fast-forwarded the DVD till I saw a man enter the bedroom with a little overnight case. The timestamp indicated 4 p.m. I saw Roger approach Laura, who was stretched on a chaise. They had yet to say anything. He stood beside her as she grinned up at him. They began having sex. It was almost clinical, like I was watching a lousy movie. Not even that. It seemed like I was witnessing 2 animals rut. I observed them both rise and proceed to the bed, where they cuddled for a while. I was struck by how little talk there was between the two, as if this was such a normal event for them that words were unnecessary. The camera must have been positioned to provide a view from the foot of the bed. It was hard to watch. I pulled my gaze away from the TV. I couldn't watch since my eyesight was clouded by my unexpected tears. I felt myself hyperventilating and battled to control my breathing. It took a few seconds before I could bring myself to observe the events in that room again. I saw that they did not use any contraception. I turned off the DVD, withdrew it from the laptop, and put it back in its sleeve. I grabbed the reports and DVDs and secured them in my office safe. I had no desire to see anymore, and I had no interest in reading the full report Paul had supplied me. I simply sat and looked out the window. I felt completely numb, almost as if I were outside of my body. I realized I was in shock, and I battled to achieve mental stability. I took a big breath and realized what I needed to do. The activities I had set for myself that day and in the following days helped to settle me down. I kept myself occupied with my goals and work-related tasks on a daily basis. I was thankful for Laura's ongoing apathy and retreat. It made it easy for me to play the unassuming spouse. Thankfully, I wouldn't have to keep up the act for much longer. On Wednesday, I phoned Henry Foster. "Paul, can you get me a key card for that room in Boston?" He knew precisely which room I was referring about. "Whoa, Michael, calm down. I don't like what I'm hearing. You're smart enough to recognize the foolishness of doing anything violent." "Paul, I assure you that I have absolutely no intention of becoming violent. I just think that it would be most appropriate if I showed up there and had a little conversation with my wife and her lover. I absolutely promise that there will be no violence. Trust me." There was a pause on the line, and I could sense the reluctance in his voice. "Okay, Michael, I'm trusting you on this. Please don't disappoint me. I'll get the key card over to you by Friday morning." "Thanks, Paul." "I owe you a lot," I remarked as I replaced the phone on its base. True to his promise, a messenger brought a sealed packet early Friday. I kept myself occupied that morning with banal duties before informing Pan that I would be unavailable for the remainder of the day. She had my mobile phone number and would call me if absolutely necessary. I got behind the wheel of my automobile and drove out to the freeway. I had a bit of a drive, so I'd be at the motel about 4:30 p.m. The valet took my vehicle and I glanced around as I entered the lobby. Quite good. There are no dismal, inexpensive digs for lovers. The elevator carried me to the correct level and I immediately found my way to their room. I pressed my ear to the door and heard nothing. I softly opened the door and peeked inside. The door led onto a small corridor with a closet to the right. Beyond that, there looked to be a tiny living room. This was clearly a suite. I heard them from the doorway to the bedroom. I crept softly to the partially open door, pushed it open slightly, and glanced inside. They did not notice me. I doubt they would have noticed if Peter Pan and the Lost Boys had entered the room. They were in the middle of their work. Damn. Could I have timed it better? Bravo. Bravo. What a performance. Is it feasible to have an encore? I applauded and yelled very loudly. It seemed as if a bomb had exploded in the room. Roger sprang away from Laura and stood beside the bed, holding a piece of the sheet with which he had covered himself. Laura had pulled the remaining half of the sheet to her chest. Her eyes were wide with terror, and she had gone an unusual shade of grey when she realized who was there in the doorway. McGrath just stood there, jaw gaping. Laura dropped her eyes. I entered the room casually and sat down in the chair. Okay, Mr. McGrath, I won't use the term doctor because it remains to be seen how long you'll be able to retain that title. You have two options, which I will explain in detail. Option 1, you will close your practice and move out of the area, out of state. Pennsylvania is too close, may I suggest Boston? That way, you can still meet my soon-to-be ex-wife and resume your weekend activities. I'm sure she would be terribly disappointed if you did not continue doing her I lifted my wrist and checked my watch. You have 60 seconds to make a decision, or I will decide what action to take. After a few seconds, I heard him murmur, "Great. You son of a bitch." I lifted my eyes in faux amazement. That's not an answer. You have 20 seconds left. You win, he said. His face sagged, drawn, and scared. He realized he didn't have much of a choice. I held his balls in a vice. Wise choice. Now get dressed and get out of here before I change my mind, I snapped at you. He changed quickly, grabbed his suitcase, and left without looking at Laura. As the door shut behind him, I turned to face my wife. She was still sitting up in bed, clutching the sheet to her breast. I saw her pallid face. Her gaze was still averted. She did not meet my eyes. I saw one tear running down her face. Laura, I said. I'm not going to ask why you destroyed our marriage. I don't want to know the reasons behind your adultery. I really don't give a shit about the reasons for your betrayal, so I kept going. I fully intended to destroy you. I intended to bring all of the evidence of your infidelity, written and visual, to court. Our children would have been horrified and your reputation irrevocably shredded, which would have effectively ruined your career with your firm. But I'm not going down that road. I realized that by doing that, I would be descending to your level and I would lose my self-respect. So I'm filing for a no-fault divorce. I'll let you explain to the kids why we are splitting up. I already rented an apartment and all of my things should be moved in by the time I leave here. I don't want you to contact me under any circumstances, either in person, by phone, or by mail. I would really prefer it if I never saw you again. Right now, the sight of you sickens me. Any necessary communication will be through my attorney and the necessary papers will be delivered. To her credit, she did not start with tired justifications. I missed it. Oh, I'm so sorry, it was just sex, I love you, not him. Or, I've never done this before, please forgive me, it'll never happen again. Or, I was bored, it was just a fling. I didn't hear any of it. Sorry, she simply sat there, pale as a ghost and with her head down. For a short time, I felt pity for her, but I soon dismissed it. I stood up, looked at her one last time, turned and went rapidly out the door and out of her life. The divorce proceeded fast since it was uncontested. Roger kept his word, as if he had a choice. He was gone in less than a month, with his practice sold to a new physician. Laura hadn't attempted to contact me, which was a relief. I wanted to put this awful situation behind me as soon as possible. Did I grieve? Of course, I did. It's difficult to move on after being in love and married to the same lady for over 18 years. Did I have any misgivings about my actions? No. I realized I had no other options. So there were many evenings when I merely looked blankly at television pictures until boredom pushed me to take a sleeping medication in bed. Then, on a Sunday afternoon a few weeks after the final ruling, my son Ethan arrived at my home. Dad, he murmured, putting his arms around me and hugging me. Ethan, it's good to see you. Where's your wife? Is everything okay? I said, concerned. No, Dad, everything is not okay. In fact, it stinks and I need to talk to you. Diane wanted to come, but I convinced her to let me do this. I didn't want you to think that we were ganging up on you. Oh, I thought. Here it comes. I brought my kid into the living room and asked if he wanted something to drink. He shook his head and inhaled. Dad, Mom is a mess, he replied gently. We're really afraid for her health. She's lost too much weight, and she's become a virtual hermit in the house. She told us all about her affair and has accepted the fact that the divorce is totally her fault, but you've got to do something. She's killing herself. This was not the first time I had heard of Laura's decline. Grace had compelled me to listen to her a few weeks ago. I slid my chair closer to Ethan and attempted to explain my situation. Ethan, I could go and see your mother, but it would be futile. She would be able to tell in a second the reason why I had come. She would see that I was there not because I wanted a reconciliation, but because of the pressure exerted upon me. I could actually make the situation worse. But why is that impossible? Why can't a reconciliation take place? Ethan said. Dad, Mom is truly sorry. She is ashamed of what she's done. Why can't you at least try to get over this? Why can't you even accept counseling? Why are you being so intransigent? Son, I began, I'll try to explain, but please just listen and try to understand. I've given that subject a lot of thought, and I'll try to explain to you why I feel as I do. First of all, your mother's infidelity was not a one-time event. It wasn't a temporary loss of judgment or a tipsy, unfortunate mistake that she hadn't planned or anticipated. Her affair was a cold, calculated affair that had been going on for months. She knew what she was doing and the possibility. Also, it isn't just the adultery, the infidelity, that is difficult to overcome, it's also the lying, cheating, betrayal, humiliation that is heaped upon the unsuspecting partner. I know that many may view my stubbornness as bullheaded and intolerant, the bitterness of a fool who refuses to give his wife an opportunity to prove her love and loyalty. They may be right, but I can't help how I feel. God, Dad, don't you love Mom anymore? He said, sobbing. I couldn't help but shed tears. I still love your mother, Ethan, but it's not worth living with a cheater, I whispered. Julia attempted to chat with me about my divorce. She had stayed close to Laura and was offering her any help she could. I quietly but clearly informed her that it was not a subject I wanted to discuss. She received the message and stopped trying to persuade me to open up until one day, at my workplace. Daniel, please don't say one word. There's something that you should know, and I don't want you to interrupt me. Julia then took a big breath. Daniel, Laura is pregnant. I sat there, mouth wide, absolutely stunned. Then it struck me I had entirely forgotten about how I messed about with her birth control pills. I had not anticipated that what I did would be so successful. Conflicting emotions rushed through my mind. The initial feeling was remorse. I honestly did not want to wish this on Laura. This revelation just made our parting seem more certain. I just shook my head and leaned back in my chair. Julia had kept an eye on me as I responded to her news. She saw the shock and amazement. Daniel, you know Laura. She absolutely refuses to even consider an abortion. She has decided to have the child and then give it up for adoption. Well, Julia, perhaps she should contact David Clark and inform him that he's going to be a father again, I said with a smile. I quickly apologized for the comment and informed Julia that there was nothing I could do. Money's not a problem. Laura has plenty and is perfectly able to take the time off to have the baby. I wish her well. Damn, Daniel, you've really turned into one cold, heartless human, she yelled at me before turning and stomping out of my office. I sat there shocked. Am I the cold-hearted one? I am the one that cheated on my wife for months. I'm the one who stopped having sex due to a made-up disease. I understood that I would never understand women. When the going gets tough, they stick together. In some ways, this is a positive thing since Laura now has someone to depend on. Good for them both. They deserved each other. Over the following 6 months, Julia and I were able to re-establish a professional relationship and, ultimately, our friendship. She started to see how deeply Laura's infidelity had hurt me, how distraught I was. She had been so focused on getting Laura out of her despair that she had lost sight of her role in our split. Julia informed me one day in my office that she had finally come to see my argument. I'm truly sorry, Daniel. I had been so concerned about Laura and what was happening to her that I completely minimized how you must have felt. And her feelings too. There's no question that you've been treated badly. Laura finally got through to me how horribly she had acted. Please forgive me. Of course, Julia. I'm just happy that Laura has such a good friend in you. I'm sure you're a tremendous help to her. I hope that she is coping better. The query in my voice was clear. Julia nodded. Yes, it seems that her pregnancy woke her up and made her realize that there's a life to lead. She is far from happy, but she's coping. I think she'll be okay. She's considering 2 couples as potential parents for the baby. She's trying to keep busy. I smiled, happy to hear that my ex-wife was doing well, but I didn't want to hear any more news from that direction. Despite my weak protests, Julia was sometimes able to inform me of Laura's whereabouts. She was coping, but she was really unhappy. She was getting by one day at a time. She was doing well because of the baby. She wanted to remain healthy in order not to damage the baby, etc., etc. I was doing the same thing, living life one day at a time. No one knew I was really miserable. Also, I missed Laura. I miss her with all of my existence. I considered reconciling with her once or twice, but I felt deep down that it would not work. I simply couldn't get over the infidelity and adultery. I knew I wouldn't be able to overcome it. That certainly reveals more about my personality than Laura's. Was I really a cold, uncaring bastard? Does not everyone deserve another chance? These kinds of questions irritated and frustrated me. But after the day was over, I realized I couldn't forget or forgive. Perhaps I was a nasty person after all, or only a weak one. Every day ended the same. I'd leave work and hurry back to my flat. I'd eat a stale sandwich or anything else from the fridge. Then I'd settle down with my first scotch of the day. I'd watch the news on TV and nurse my scotch. When the glass was emptied, I'd add new ice cubes and nursing the second scotch. Often, there was a third and possibly a fourth. I knew that wasn't a good thing. Was I becoming an alcoholic? I didn't think so, but I didn't care too much. It wasn't interfering with my job, so what the heck? It helped me feel better. I was 46 years old, and my future seemed gloomy. I know I have a career. I earn a lot of money. I can purchase practically whatever I want, within reason. So, I lost my wife. So what? It occurs every day, someplace. I realized I needed to quit feeling sorry for myself and make some choices. I knew one thing: I was very bored with business law. I came to work with my ass dragging and departed the same way. I considered moving into criminal law. I knew I'd need some retraining. I began to really consider it. I also considered quitting everything and retiring. Perhaps I would go on a globe cruise. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Cherry and I resumed our relationship. No, there was no romance. She was a very close friend to both Laura and me. She remained a connection between the two of us, one I wasn't sure I wanted but was now hesitant to sever. Julia continued to visit Laura on a regular basis for lunch, shopping, and other activities. Whatever the ladies do. One early afternoon, while I was strolling by a tiny cafe near my workplace, I decided to stop in and purchase a coffee to go. As I waited at the counter, I looked into the dining room and saw Julia and a very pregnant Laura. They didn't see me, but this was my first glimpse of my ex-wife since the incident in the hotel room. I was suddenly unable to breathe. It seemed like a massive iron hand had grasped my chest. I staggered out the door and hurried back to my office. I sat behind my desk, trying to recover control of my breathing. Goddamn, it wasn't fair. Why should I have to endure like this? Laura's infidelity should have destroyed whatever love I had for her. Why did the sight of her give me so much pain? I was a total disaster. Was this how my life was going to go? For the first time since my split, I considered visiting a therapist. Everyone had suggested that I do so, but I had rejected every request. I did not believe I had an issue. Now I was not so sure. Was it conceivable that I might forget and forgive? I didn't think so, but I knew I was unhappy. I needed to do something. I'm not sure how long I sat there pondering. It may have lasted 10 minutes or 2 hours. I glanced up to see Julia standing at the doorway, leaning against the jamb. I saw you, she said gently. I saw how you staggered out of the place. No, I didn't say anything to Laura. I saw no need to. Julia, you've got to do something. You're going to drive yourself crazy, she murmured quietly. I knew she was correct. I needed to do something, but I wasn't sure what to do. I glanced up at Julia and she could see I wasn't happy. Julia, do me a really big favor and just let me be for a while. I know that I have to make some decisions and I will, but right now I need to be alone, okay? Julia nodded and exited, closing the door behind her. I simply there, staring at the closed door. Then it came to me. I instantly realized what I wanted to accomplish. I wanted to get the heck away. Stay away from Laura, Julia, and the workplace. I needed a freaking vacation. I realize it's not a major insight, but it is genuine nevertheless. I phoned the senior partner and informed him that I would be taking some time off. I had nothing important to do, so he inquired when I'd be returning. I informed him that I had no notion. He laughed and encouraged me to have a wonderful time. I drove home and packed 2 bags, a garment bag, and my toiletries. I was on the road before 5 p.m. headed south. Around 10 p.m., I arrived south of Richmond, Georgia, checked into a hotel, and went to bed. I hadn't eaten anything since lunch and wasn't really hungry. I got up early, strolled over to Waffle House, and ate a full meal. I felt better immediately. I passed the California state border that night. I didn't feel any driving tiredness, so I proceeded south and found a motel off the freeway at Santa Monica. I had a light meal, a fast shower, and went to bed. I fell asleep in approximately 5 minutes. The next day, I drove into Santa Monica and was pleased. It's a lovely small town. I walked into a real estate agency, inquired about lodgings, and booked a really good, furnished 1-bedroom unit with a wraparound balcony overlooking the ocean. I paid for 2 weeks upfront and was moved in by the afternoon. I went out and purchased some basic foods. I considered purchasing a few bottles of fine scotch, but decided against it. I wanted my mind to be clear. I enjoyed myself. I really did. I went out to dinner every night and ate breakfast and lunch on the condo's balcony. I began running on the beach early in the morning and then went swimming in the water. And I thought and argued with myself. I was blessed to be able to do it secretly. Otherwise, someone would have phoned the guys in white jackets. So I sat for nearly a week, arguing with myself. I jogged, arguing with myself. I strolled, arguing with myself. I felt unhappy without Laura. That was a given. Even if I were able to reconcile with her, I had a strong suspicion that I would remain unhappy. I genuinely questioned my ability to forget and forgive. What were my alternatives? I could attempt to go on with my life, forget about Laura and how she banged her lover in the hotel bed. I tried it. I was much more unhappy. Another alternative is to relocate, move away from that part of the nation. Maybe relocate to California. That alternative seemed quite appealing to me. I had plenty of money. Perhaps I'd even seek a license to practice here and set up a modest office. It would be simpler to let go and forget. But weren't the years I spent with my wife worth at least trying to get over her infidelity? I knew I loved her. So why not just give in and seek counseling? Perhaps even see a shrink. Can I do that? Was it possible for me to get over her adultery? Perhaps the simplest solution is to simply dump everything and move on. I cursed. I swore. I am sweating. I was on the verge of a problem and I was weary of riding that bull. It took about a week for me to cool down and become sensible, at which point I reached a preliminary decision about what I should do. It was early afternoon when I picked up my mobile phone and switched it on. It had been turned off since I left the workplace for my vacation. I contacted Julia in the office. "Hi, sweetie, it's me, Daniel." I tried to make it light and nice. There was complete quiet for a few seconds. Then she erupted. "You rotten son of a bitch," she said. "How dare you scare the shit out of me that way? How dare you disappear without a word to anyone?" I attempted to explain that I had cleared my absence, but she simply yelled at me. I waited until she ran out of breath before interrupting. "Shut the hell up, Julia. I had to get away. Don't you understand that? You yourself told me I was going nuts. I just wanted to get away to think, to try to come to some conclusions. I needed to get away," I said, sobbing. Julia was silent. Then she responded quietly. "Okay, Daniel, I guess I understand. We can't talk now. I have someone waiting to see me. I'll give you a call after I get home and keep your cell phone on." Julia called me at precisely 7:16 p.m. that evening. Daniel, Julia said. "Daniel, Laura hemorrhaged at the restaurant. God, there was blood everywhere. The paramedics just put her in the ambulance. I'm following to the hospital. I'll call you as soon as I know anything. Keep your phone near you." "Julia, which hospital? What did the medics say?" I inquired, but got no response. Julia was already gone. I paced. Saturday. I stepped out onto the balcony. At 8:36 p.m., my phone rang. It was Julia. she sobbed. Daniel, there were complications, she managed to say. Julia's final words before I dropped the phone were, Daniel, she's dead. Laura is dead. Thank you for watching. How would you have handled this situation? Let us know in the comments and remember to like and subscribe.